Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussions to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 6th session of the 7th cycle of the workshop that was presented on August 31st, 2024, where we began the 4-step inventory and completed the resentment inventory. Next week, we'll begin the fears inventory. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and then take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and as we all know, the Big Book is this book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. And as we've stated many times, merely reading the book without experiencing it is not useful. It's good information, but we can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. We can read all the instructions and study it all we want, but until we actually jump in the water and practice swimming, we're never going to learn how to swim. And that's what the Big Book states. The cover page states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. We focus on the term recovered. And I don't get involved in the controversy of whether it's recovering or recovered. I see the word recovered in the book many, many times. So that if that's what the book says, that's what I focus on. Now, the definition of recovered means that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice as to whether I drink or not, because I don't even think about drinking. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful.
My old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new peaceful ones. So that's what we're focusing on here. The old ways are gone, new ways have come in. Another definition comes from the 10th step promise, which is also on page 84. And it states that, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So we're talking about how do we get into fit spiritual condition. And that's what these steps are showing us. Page 27 of the big book defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then we're going from the front of the book to the back of the book in the appendix. The spiritual experience gives a description of recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. So our personality changes. The foreword to the first edition states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So this is what we are doing. We are doing what the big book says to do. There's a lot of people in our program who do not do this. Or they're waiting to do something perfectly, or they they say, oh, well, the only step you have to take perfectly is the first one. Well, I don't know about that. Yes, we are powerless over alcohol, but it does state there are 12 steps, not just one, not just two, not just three. There's 12. So when we understand this, the first thing that we're looking at is having that understanding, that self-knowledge. I've got to know that I am an alcoholic, and I have to understand that. Absolutely. If I'm a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I can't take just one drink without I can't take one drink without taking one after the other. I'm at step one. I'm powerless over alcohol. My life has become unmanageable. And therefore, as that real alcoholic, the only thing it does is make me realize that I can't take just one drink without being physically driven. Remember, it's physical. I'm physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on the first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power. So that brings me to step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the only requirement for step two to answer yes to this question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there's a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I can answer yes to that, I'm ready to go to step 3, which is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Step 3 is only a decision. I only make the decision here. I do not turn my will and my life over to the care of God in step 3. I'm not capable of doing that. So the third step prayer is where I offer myself to God. And I'm asking God to take away my difficulties so that I may do thy will always. And all that's needed in step 3 is faith. Faith that this higher power will help me, which brings us to step 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Okay, so let's going back to the 4th step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Again, we take the instruction on how to do the 4th step directly from the big book. And therefore, we have to commit to doing these inventories in direct proportion to how badly we want our life to change. And the funny part is, once that character defect was lifted, it's not that I go around saying, hey, I don't care what you think or how you feel, but I speak my truth today. I don't stuff my truth and put on a false face because I want you to like me. So when we get into the 4th step, I like to use an analogy to think about the 4th step. So, and it's an analogy for doing steps 4 through 7, basically. So pretend you're, say, 7 years old, and your mother tells you to go into your room and clean your room, and you do it, but you're not happy about it. But instead of telling you to clean your room, suppose your mother told you to go through all your things. Put on your bed any clothes that don't fit or that you don't like anymore, any toys that you don't play with anymore, and anything that you think might be yucky. That represents step 4. Then your mother comes in and you show her all the stuff you don't want anymore. That's step 5. Next, your mother asks you to make sure you don't want this stuff anymore because you are sure, it's going to be put in the car and take it to the Salvation Army. That's step 6. Now you go to the Salvation Army, you give away all the stuff you don't want anymore. And after that, your mother takes you to the mall and buys you replacements for all the stuff you just gave away. These replacements are things that are really great and they bring you joy. That's step 7. So that's what we're basically doing. We're looking at all the stuff we don't want anymore. We're showing it to our sponsor. Then we're taking steps to get rid of it and giving it to God, who is going to replace it with better things. So when we get into the 4th step, we have 4 4th step inventories, and these are forms. These forms are in the workbook, and the forms are also available individually on the Google Drive, which if you get the email, you will get a link to the Google Drive and all the forms themselves. So if you have the workbook, in the back of the workbook, there are blank forms. And if you want more electronic forms, these forms are available in a Word document. So our 4th step inventory consists of 4 individual inventories. First, our resentments, our fears, and the last 2 are the harms inventories, which the harms have to do with the harms that we've done to other people that exclude our sexual conduct, and then the harms that are based on our sex conduct. I don't know why Bill separated them like that, but he did. And I guess because it's such an impactful area of our lives that it can impact so many other areas. So the first one that we start on is the resentment inventory. And on the resentment inventory on page 64, it states that we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. So page 65 provides the example, and for our purposes, we're going to use the example from the big book. Now, one of the things you need to know is that I did evoke artistic license when it comes to these inventory forms, because Bill didn't put everything in the book. So I did embellish upon some of them just for example's sake. But what we basically do, you can use the form, or you can use a blank sheet of paper, or if you want to use do it on the computer, that's fine as well. But what you're basically doing is you're listing everyone that you're upset with. And in the big book, Bill lists Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer, my wife. It's right there in the book on that chart. So it doesn't matter if the resentment is big or small. As long as your peace of mind is disturbed by this person, their name is written down. I heard one person say, well, I don't really have any resentments. And their sponsor said to them, okay, well, are there any people that you feel superior to? And then they were able to come up with the list, because they realized under that superiority feeling, they actually had a resentment, which was what. So if you think that you don't have any resentments, then you want to think about people that maybe you feel superior to, or you don't like, or whatever, something else. Because remember, we have a disease of denial. And especially if you're a people pleaser like I was, I don't want to admit that I have a resentment against anybody. And I couldn't even see it. I would just say I like everybody. And there are some people that I don't like. There are people that I have resentments against. So the next instruction comes from page 64. And on page 64, it states, we asked ourselves why we were angry. And I just love these pictures of these little kids, because it reminds me of, as alcoholics, we are very immature. We are like little kids. We use the expression king baby. But I love these little kids. And this one here reminds me of my granddaughter when she was little. She used to give me that face all the time. But that's how we are. We dig in our heels, but we have to ask ourselves, why are we angry? And that one of my favorite expressions was, I'm not angry. I was furious, but I could not admit it. So we ask ourselves why we're angry. And then this is what it looks like. I've taken the part from the book. So these are the instructions for column 1. All right, we take the first name from the list that we made, and then we add it to column 1 of the resentment area, the resentment inventory. So here we are. We've got Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer, my wife. Now, column 2. In column 2, we list all the reasons we're upset with this person, why they deserve a special place in hell. Basically, I love. Why does this person deserve a special place in hell? All right. So in column 2, we put all the reasons we're upset with this person. And we put each reason on a separate line in a separate box in column 2. So we're looking here at Mr. Brown. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown because they pay attention to my wife. They told my wife about my mistress. And this creep, Brown, might get my job at the office. So this bad person, Brown, might get my job at the office. Now we're looking at Mrs. Jones. She's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking, and he's my friend. She's a gossip. My employer, My employer is unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. And my wife misunderstands and nags. She likes brown and she wants the house put in her name. How dare she? This is my house. This is my. So when you're done listing all of the resentments associated with the person, again, you move on to the next one and do the same thing. And you continue doing this until you're done with all the names you've listed. And again, this example is right on page 65 in the big book. So you make it very succinct. No long descriptions and definitely no justifications and stories. We want to get into our stories as to why they did what they did and why I'm justifying blah, blah, blah. No justifications. Everything is just noun, verb. No emotions are attached, no justifications, no explanations. And again, remember, no stories. We can get caught up in the rabbit hole of our stories forever. So be specific. So you wouldn't want to, so for example, you wouldn't want to put down that someone used you. Instead, you would write how they used you, such as they borrowed money and didn't pay you back, or they lied to get you to do something that you didn't want to do. The next instruction is on pages 64 and 65, and it states, in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our inventory, our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? So that's what we're looking at. Next, we're looking at in column 3, it's used to show what is in column 2, hurt, threatened, or interfered with your parts of self. And remember, these parts of self are your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, your pride, your pocketbook, your money, your finances, or anything of a material nature, your emotional security, how safe you feel in the world, your ambitions, your plans for the future, both immediate and down the road, your personal relations, how you interact with others, and your sex relationships. So this is where we're looking at the parts of self. Now, in this part of the inventory, we're looking at in column 3, the parts of self get wounded. And that's how we have a resentment. So here's what it looks like. I've taken it now, we're expanding the form. And what we've done, I've seen different ways of doing this, but I do like this little grid. Again, it continues from page 65 of the big book, and it's the instructions for column 3. Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong answer. You want to quickly go through with your gut instinct on whether this part of self was hurt, threatened, or interfered with by what's listed in column 2. So this is how we fill in column 3. So if what is in column 2 affected your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself or your pride, you would put a check mark in column 3 SE. If what's in column 2 affected your pocketbook, your money, your finances, or anything of a material nature, you put a check mark in column 3 P. If what's in column 2 affected your emotional security, how safe you feel in the world, you put a check mark in column 3 ES. If what's in column 2 affected your ambitions, your plans for the future, both immediate and down the road, you put a check mark in column 3A. If what's in column 2 affected your personal relationships, how you interact with other people, you put a check mark here in column 3 PR. And if what's in column 2 affected your sex relations, put a check mark in column 3 SR. So you would check them off. Now, one thing you want to remember is the more check marks you have, the angrier you are at this person, the stronger the resentment. So now the next instruction is on page 66. And on page 66 is we turn back to the list where it held the key to the future. Were we prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle? We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. How could we escape? And then it continues further on page 67 to state, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. So now we're looking at column 4. And column 4 is, how did I get the ball rolling? And this is where I had to embellish upon it a little bit. You'll note here that I kind of had to condense column 3. We went over that part with the parts of self, but now we're looking at column 4. This part over here was about me and them, what they did and how it hurt me. Now I'm looking at what was it that I did and how did I get the ball rolling? And remember, this is where I took artistic license because this is not in the big book. I just thought about from hearing everybody's stories over the years. I embellished upon it. Like, what are some of the things that I might have done which would cause Mr. Brown to be paying attention to my wife? So therefore, well, I was out all night. I was drunk and I didn't come home from work. So I stayed out all night. So therefore, I'm out all night, and I'm out all night because I'm shacked up in a motel with my mistress. Brown, my wife called Brown because she was worried. So Brown comes over and goes out looking for me and finds me at the motel with my mistress and tells my wife that I'm cheating on her. So I was cheating on my wife, and Brown might get my job at the office because I've been drunk on the job. So those are just some of the things that might have happened. Now, looking again at Mrs. Jones, well, she's a nut and she committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. She talks about me. Well, what did I do? Well, I was over her house drinking with her husband, and when I was drunk, I broke her table, so she didn't want me over the house anymore. So that's what I did. I was drunk, and I was a bad influence on her husband. Then my employer, my employer's unjust, overbearing, threatening to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. Well, I was drunk on the job. I did pad my expense account. I'm not reliable. I come in late and I don't complete my work. So I'm stealing from the company. I'm a liar, a thief, and a drunk. And I'm cheating, that's what I'm doing. And then my wife, well, she misunderstands and nags me. She wants the house put in her name. So what am I doing? Well, I come home drunk every day. I spend my paycheck at the bar. So she's worried that she's going to be destitute because I'm drinking away the paycheck. So these are all the things that I might have done in order to get the ball rolling. And column 4 is the difficult part of doing the steps because we don't typically look at how we're responsible. It's much easier for us to blame other people. And this column is what starts to change the way we think. We're not beating ourselves up. We're only looking at how we got the ball rolling. We're not talking about those other things. So again, in looking at these things that I did to get the ball rolling, it goes to page 62, which states, so our troubles, we think, are of our own making. If I hadn't done these things, I might not have these resentments, which we're going to talk about that later. This column indicates what we did. And the ego, the part of you that feeds on and maintains the illusion of power and control, has a slogan of its own. And that is, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. Whatever happens to you, the ego assures you that it's not your fault. The fault, and there always is a fault, always lies with other people and what they did. Your spouse, your partner, your children, your parents, your boss, your colleagues, or maybe some other type of community, racial, political, religious, something other than your own. Step 4 silences the ego. It is your fault. Perhaps not all your fault, but enough of your fault that you can begin to notice how you got the ball rolling. In all of these examples, our alcoholic friend got the ball rolling because he was drunk, unreliable, a thief, and a cheat. So that's what we're focusing on now. How did I get the ball rolling? Now, a big important point about column 4 is that it's all about you. It doesn't matter what anyone else did. You find your part in it, whether it was something you did, said, or thought, or did not do, or did not say, or did not think, some action on your part. You want to keep it simple and not beat yourself up over it. Don't add any more than you have to. You want to keep it short and concise. You're looking for verbs that describe what you actually did that caused what happened in column 2. You're looking for how you got the ball rolling, and rarely will there be an occasion where you did not have a part. Now, there are always situations where it might not have been your part. For example, if you were molested as a child, if you were raped, your child was murdered, you were a crime victim, your parents are alcoholics or drug addicts, those kinds of things. And in those kinds of instances, you need to get specific therapy for those instances. But there can be parts. So, for example, if you were a crime victim, maybe when you were drinking, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you were a crime victim, for example. But if you hadn't been there, that might not have happened. So what we're looking at is where was my part? It might not have been your fault. If you were a kid sleeping in bed and someone came in your room and molested you in the middle of the night when you were sleeping, that was not your fault. And those are the kinds of things that we need to have special therapy and things for. And again, if you were a crime victim, it wasn't your fault that you were a crime victim. If you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, maybe if you hadn't been drinking, you wouldn't have been there. So you just have to look at, well, I really shouldn't have been in that place at that time, but I was because I was drinking. So when we fill in column 4, remember, it's all about you. How did you get the ball rolling? And you want to keep it simple. Just noun and verb. I, fill in the blank. It should be something you said, did, or thought, or did not do, say, or did not think. So you check what you wrote in column 4 and make sure that it's correct. Look for cause and effect. if what's written in columns 2 and 4 are correct, you should be able to reverse these things using their opposites and say things that make sense and ring true. So, for example, if you look here, we're reversing it. All right. So, if I had been sober and come home from work, I would not be having an affair. I would not have been drunk on the job. And Mr. Brown would not be paying attention to my wife, telling her about a mistress or being considered for my job at work. Therefore, he wouldn't have done what he did, and I wouldn't have the resentment. The same thing with Mrs. Jones. If I had been sober, I would have not been drinking with her husband or broken her table, and Mrs. Jones would not have snubbed me. Therefore, this would not have happened. My employer, if I didn't pad my expense account, if I was reliable, if I came to work on time, completed my work, and didn't drink on the job, my boss wouldn't threaten to fire me, so I wouldn't have this problem. And the same thing with my wife. If I came directly home from work and was sober, did not stop at the bar and spend my paycheck, my wife would not misunderstand and nag me. So a warning here is you don't want to berate yourself about what you write in column 4. What you're looking for is at the facts. And the fact is you did what you did based on your character defects because you were drunk. When we get to column 5, you'll see what you did in column 4 was all that you could do at the time because a character defect came into play, and our character defects think they're protecting us. So just like you don't have to pay attention to which hand you brush your teeth with or how you actually brush your teeth, your character defects automatically come into play. And when we're drinking, we are powerless over that because we are caught in the physical compulsion of the allergy. So when we get to column 5, it'll show you that you're not a bad person. All you are is someone who has character defects as a result of the disease of alcoholism. But these character defects are trying to protect these 6 parts of self. So what you want to do is when you get this written down, remember you're looking at cause and effect. So you check columns 2 and 4 to see if they follow cause and effect. So if you're saying, if I did not do whatever's in column 4, if I hadn't done those things, then whoever's in column 1 would not have done what they did in column 2. So it doesn't, if I didn't believe or think whatever's in column 4, then it wouldn't matter what whoever is in column 1 did. That's in column 2. So if what you wrote doesn't make sense, either what's in column 2 rather isn't really what you're angry about, or column 4 is incorrect. So keep working with it and manipulate it so that it's appropriate, so that you see the cause and effect until it rings true for you. The next instruction is on page 67, which states, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. And again, this is on page 67. Column 5 is used to find the character defects that allowed you to do what you did in column 4. And there are 5 main character defects. And the 5 main character defects are: I'm selfish, I want what I want, and I want it done my way. I'm dishonest, I'm a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I'm self-seeking. I want more than I have right now. I'm frightened and I'm inconsiderate. Then, as we get into this a little bit further, these are the 5 main ones, but there's also other character defects that sort of fall under the umbrella of some of these, which would be things like I'm an approval seeker, disrespectful, I'm entitled, I'm immature, I'm impatient, I'm lazy, I'm mean spirited, I'm a people pleaser, I'm a procrastinator, I'm self-centered, I'm two-faced, I'm unethical, I'm unreliable, I'm vengeful. These are just some other defects that are there. So now when we get to the review of the resentments, I'm looking at the review of my resentments where I've checked off the character defect. Was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate, and then some of the other character defects are I'm jealous. And this goes on with all of them. Looking at Mrs. Jones, I checked off that I'm frightened and I'm inconsiderate and I'm a people pleaser because I want her husband to like me. With my employer, I checked off I'm selfish, dishonest, frightened, inconsiderate, and I'm entitled, unethical, irresponsible, undependable, unhelpful, and unreliable. And then with my wife, I checked them all off, and then I have a whole long laundry list here of some of the other character defects that are there. Okay. So what we're looking at again is looking at some of the additional character defects our friend from the big book has. So as we get into this, some of those character defects, what character defects allowed him to do what he did? What allowed him to get drunk and not come home from work and stay out all night? Well, he was selfish. He wanted to drink. He was frightened. He was afraid of what his wife might do or say. He was inconsiderate. He didn't care that she was holding dinner or was worried about him. And he was jealous of Brown. What character defects allowed him to cheat on his wife? Again, he was selfish, dishonest. He was lying to his wife, and he may have even been lying to his mistress. She might not have known he was married. We don't know. He was self-seeking. He wanted more than he had. He was frightened. He was afraid his wife would find out. He was inconsiderate. He only cared about himself and not about the consequences his behavior brought upon his wife and his mistress. And others was he was promiscuous. He was engaging in risky sexual behavior, which could have put his wife at risk if he came up with a venereal disease or something, and he was lustful. What allowed him to be drunk on the job? Fear. He was afraid of getting caught. And what Brown might say to his wife, he was jealous. He was jealous of Brown. What allowed him to get drunk with Mrs. Smith's husband and break her table? Again, he was fearful. He was afraid Mr. Smith wouldn't like him. He was inconsiderate. He didn't care about Mrs. Smith's property. One of the other ones was that he was a people pleaser. He wanted Brown to like him. And then in looking at what allowed him to be drunk on the job, pad his expense account, and be unreliable, come late to work or not complete his work. Again, selfish. He didn't care about himself. He didn't care about his colleagues. He didn't care that someone else had to pick up the slack when he wasn't there. He was dishonest. He thought it was okay to steal from his employer, both in resources, time, and work performance. He was stealing time from his employer when he was late. He was frightened. He was afraid he would get fired. He was self-seeking. He wanted more than he had. He was inconsiderate. He didn't care that other people were depending on him. And some of the other ones were that he was entitled. He thought he deserved extra money from the expense account and to be paid for time not spent at work, as well as a work that he didn't produce that other people had to do, which made him unethical, irresponsible, undependable, unhelpful, and unreliable. And then what made him come home drunk every day and spend his paycheck at the bar? Again, it comes back to the same thing. He was selfish, he was dishonest, he was self-seeking, he was frightened, he was inconsiderate. And some of those other character defects were that he was thoughtless, irresponsible, disrespectful. He was a procrastinator, he was rude, he was undependable, unhelpful, and unreliable. So when we fill this out, when you fill in the column 5, you want to start by asking yourself if you did the action in column 4 because you were selfish, keeping what I have and wanting things done my way. If so, then you put a check mark in the selfish column. If it was, I was dishonest, I was lying, cheating, stealing, I put a check mark in the dishonest column. If I was self-seeking, wanting more than I have right now, I put a check mark in the self-seeking column. If I was frightened, I put a check mark in the frightened column. If I was inconsiderate, I put a check mark in the inconsiderate column. So I want to look at again, that other list of other character defects and see if there's any additional character defects that were involved. If you found other character defects, then you add them to the column labeled other. And you want to keep it simple, not list too many. And now in the example, I listed a lot because I used it as an example. But you just want to list the ones that caused you to do what you did. This is important because the more specific, it's really important because Bill mentions some of these in the big book. For example, on pages 61 and 62, he lists mean, egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, self-centered, and self-delusional. Also, you'll see as we get to steps 6 and 7, the instructions for these 2 steps includes the wording that we're ready to let God remove from us all the things that we have admitted are objectionable, and every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. While every character defect falls within the major 5, a combination of them, it's better to be more specific. So for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. Therefore, and also another thing is being mean-spirited is actually being selfish, self-seeking, inconsiderate, and frightened at the same time. But using the description mean-spirited gives me the exact behavior of what I'm actually doing when I get to step 7. In reality, the same situations are going to keep repeating themselves. We will repeat what we don't repair. And so, for example, if you're a people pleaser, you're going to continually find yourself in situations where you agree to do things that you don't want to do. And then you're going to get upset because people, places, and things don't do what you want them to do. Therefore, you continue to be unhappy and wonder, why me? Why me? Why does this always happen to me again and again and again? And that's because your character defects are coming into play. These character defects. I used to wonder why I always found myself in the same situation over and over and over again. It was just the same thing was happening, only the faces changed. It was different people. Because it's not the person listed in column 1 of your resentment inventory that's causing your unhappiness, but the character defects that come into play. So as you progress through the steps, you'll find that once you get into step 7, these character defects start to diminish. And in step 10, they can be removed. And as a result, the problems caused by them begin to vanish. So that finishes up the resentment inventory. Next week, we'll start on the fears inventory.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's Prayer for Mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.